Hi everyone, and welcome to the Shane Plays first look and review of the first issue of Sideways, which is the latest premiere issue in the new age of DC heroes from DC Comics. We've had Damage #1, and Damage #2 is actually out now. I haven't had a chance to read it. It's sitting in my pile. And then we have the Silencer #1, and now we have Sideways #1. So take a nice look at that. Again, you know, it keeps saying from the pages of Metal, Dark Knight's Metal. And finally in this issue, we understand at least how this series and character is tied into Metal. As I've pointed out, for Damage and Silencer, we really don't know. So let's just get something out of the way. Take a look at that character, and based on that artwork and maybe some other artwork you've seen sort of promoting this character, I don't know about you, but what immediately comes to mind for me is Spider-Man. And we've talked about, and I'm not the only one talking about it. In fact, DC's really not making any big secret of it, that this stuff is heavily influenced by, and maybe, you know, the polite word is an homage to DC or Marvel characters and maybe some other, you know, teams and that sort of thing. Terrifics obviously seems like Fantastic Four. Damage seems like the Hulk. Now the Silencer we talked about doesn't really fit a specific Marvel archetype. But, you know, Brimstone looks like that's going to be their Ghost Rider possibly. And then, of course, Sideways. There's so much about Sideways. This is probably one that is the most outright, I don't know if ripoff's the right word, but they're definitely borrowing heavily from Spider-Man. You know, I wrote this down in some notes. You know, the solicit, you know, when they do the solicits ahead of time for the comic book store owners, the synopsis for Sideways #1 even says, "With great power comes great liability." And of course, the famous quote from Spider-Man, Stan Lee, and all that is, "With great power comes great responsibility." So they're not even trying to, you know, really hide the fact that this is a Spider-Man inspired character and series. Let's look at some of the other ways that it ties in. One, this character is an orphan. And, you know, you'll remember Peter Parker was an orphan, and his aunt and uncle took him in. In this case, it seems like the main character, Derek, is just a straight up orphan and has been just, you know, adopted, I think by non-relative parents. And his name is Derek James. He's of Puerto Rican descent. And I read an article, I think Dan DiDio, I hope I'm saying that right. He's like one of the co-publishers of DC Comics or something like that. And he's also doing some writing on this. You know, he said that the artist for this series brought in the Puerto Rican influence. So let's see. The build, you know, that sort of slender, athletic build of Sideways very much, you know, invokes Spider-Man. And then the costume, you know, I mean, you know, it's not an exact ripoff, but, you know, especially the mask and the eyes and all that seems very Spider-Man-ish. Let's see. He's got a very smart aleck attitude, which is one of the things I love about Spider-Man. In fact, some people in role-playing games have even, you know, made it so that his taunting and smart aleckness, is that a word or a phrase, is actually one of his powers, his skills and abilities to distract his opponents and kind of keep them off balance or enrage them or whatever. He's a high school student who's picked on by the other students, and that's very much, you know, early Peter Parker days. Spider-Man has a quick movement ability. You know, he shoots those webs and swings around. And now this is a little more dramatic, but Sideways has a quick movement power where he creates rifts and he steps sideways through them, and can basically teleport to other physical locations. And it sounds like, based on some interviews I've read, even maybe some other dimensions and that sort of thing. He is super strong. That I didn't realize that till I read this issue. I thought he was just, you know, looked like Spider-Man and could create rifts, but he's super strong. He seems to be super tough. It's set in a big city with a lot of skyline, much like You know, Spider-Man in New York, and I love that artwork there. That's some great artwork. And then again, the synopsis and the solicit said, you know, with great power comes great liability. So I'm sure there's some other connections people can make there. I don't know. Maybe it's kind of a friendly wink at Marvel, or maybe there's something deeper going on here. Maybe I've speculated that maybe DC is saying, hey, if you're not going to do your characters, you know, because a lot of people have been complaining for the past couple of years that, you know, Marvel's not really been doing their characters justice. You can agree with that or not, but maybe DC's like, hey, if you're not going to do them, we will. I don't know. I can't really speculate, and I'm surprised I'm not seeing more questions being asked about that in interviews, because it's, you know, DC's not really trying to hide what they're doing here. You know, again, there's a new Smash in town, you know, Hulk Smash. You know, with great power comes great liability. And it's just obvious. I mean, you know, the Terrifics is basically the Fantastic Four in some ways. So anyway, I'm gonna move on. Let's get into the comic itself. Sideways #1. I will say ahead of time, I did enjoy this. It did kind of feel like reading an older Marvel comic book, which is no insult from me. That's good. For me. Now, you know, it's updated. It's more of a modern comic book. A couple things I want to point out here on this cover. See if I can get it over there. Yeah, that right there is actually not a building. That is part of what is apparently a bad guy's like power staff. But if you're not paying attention, that little picture just seems to kind of get in the, you know, seems like to be part of the skyline. So this cover is actually kind of telling a story that, you know, Sideways is coming out of a rift, and oh, there's somebody waiting on him, right? But that's revealed at the end of the at the end of the issue. Now I don't know what's going on up here. There's some sort of blobby, slimy stuff up here, and based on some character designs I've seen on the internet from characters and opponents that are going to come into this series, I think that might be something called the inverse, but we shall see. Now, another thing I want to point out, all of these New Age of Heroes comics coming out have a gatefold, a three-way gatefold cover. And what is... I'm kind of embarrassed to admit it. It didn't occur to me until Sideways. I don't know why. It's just one of those things that was obvious in front of my face. Is they're two-sided, and the back side seems to be, I'm guessing if you put them all together from all the different series, you'll get a huge like montage mural of all of the New Age of Heroes characters, as best I can tell. And then the front-facing gatefold cover shows scenes and characters from the specific issue. For example, you know, the bottom here, you know, some artwork I've seen, these look like these are going to be enemies of Sideways. And this guy here is, it's like, I can't remember his name. Let me see if I can find it here. Tempus Fuginaut. And he's like the first guy that Sideways runs into. And then there's I think it's Kill Speed in the inverse. There's a guy named the Showman. There's some other stuff going on. So anyway, and then let's see what this top one has in it. It's just showing different scenes, and I think that's the inverse, that kind of blobby creature there. So there you go. I'm like, how did that not occur to me in the last two issues? I was looking at like Damage and the Silencer, that, you know, that gatefold cover is on one side, the issue specific, and on the other side it seems to be part of a larger mural. So anyway, oh well. All right, so moving on. Another thing I wanted to point out graphically with this series is, I don't know if you could tell, but the borders of every page have these sort of graphic designs, right? If you kind of look there. And I went and looked, and the other issues I have, like Damage and the Silencer, don't seem to have the same thing going on with these. You can see those graphics there kind of outside the main borders or the main panels. So I'm not sure if it's just artistic flair for fun. Maybe over time it'll be some kind of fun thing that is kind of, depending on what's going on that page, maybe the symbols will be a certain kind of symbols and either give clues or add to the atmosphere of the story. You know, one page I found that kind of seems to imply that is, yeah, you like look here, and when it's telling Derek's origin story is sideways, you know, he's falling down sort of a crumbling situation, and if you see the artwork on the outside of the panels, it almost looks like stuff crumbling. So I don't know, but the other pages I looked at didn't really seem to have that same connection. So we'll just have to tell over time what's going on with that. So anyway, as far as the story itself, it's very much a origin story. Let's introduce the main character, his powers, and the supporting cast. Is, you know, let's get as much information as we can in there. This is the most exposition heavy comic I've read in a long time. Now, back in the day, that was really common. Like the first page or two of your ongoing monthly series would be dedicated to exposition, telling a reader what they needed to know for that to jump in, right? Because it was assumed that each issue should be as self-contained as possible. You should be able to pick up one issue of a comic book and basically get a story and have kind of an idea of what's going on. So, you know, these days, a lot of times you'll get a page of text at the front or something, you know, or maybe they may not tell you anything. They may just, you have to figure it out as you go along. But this comic book definitely evokes the older, again, like Marvel and even DC to some extent in the 80s, maybe in the 70s too, where it's just very exposition heavy. Like the first couple of pages is like a recap of what has come before, a lot of times through captions and dialogue and thought balloons. That's why thought balloons were very helpful to me. I wish they hadn't gotten rid of them. Thought balloons were a great way to catch readers up on what's happening and give them insight, you know, without having dialogue between two characters or whatever that is like, why would they be talking like that? That's, you know, very artificial, but I digress. Anyway, the first, like the whole comic issue of this is one big exposition, really, introducing you to everything. But the first 2 or 3 pages are just I mean, if exposition was a rare element, this would be a dense nugget of exposition that would probably go for quite a bit on the black market. Because I mean, this is just some of the most heavy, and I'll go through what I mean here in a second, some of the most heavy exposition I've seen in a while. So you find out just within 2 or 3 pages that the hero is named Derek, with a protagonist. I guess he's going to be a hero. He hasn't done anything heroic yet. The protagonist is named Derek James. His best friend is a girl named Ernie. Her full name is Ernestine. She is into geeky stuff and making cosplay. You can just tell by looking at her room that, I mean, she's all into cosplay and geeky stuff and that whole culture, up to including the point where, you know, he thanks her for making his costume. So she made him his costume. You find out that he just got his costume today because he couldn't wait to try it on. And you find out that she has a twin sister and that her and her twin sister are very different. You find out that they're basically high school students because they need to get, this is early in the morning and they need to go to high school. So you find out that he can make riffs, if you didn't already know that. You find out that he's super strong. I don't know if you can see that there. And then you find out that he's pretty dense because she tries to punch him, even kind of playfully. Let me see if I can find... yeah, before he picks up her dresser, you see there, she tries to punch him, and she's like, ow! You know, she says, you're like hitting a wall. So you're finding, I mean, it's just jam-packed with all this stuff. You find out later, as in the issue, he remarks to himself or has a caption to himself or something like that, where he says, hey, I'm getting better at these riffs. It's only been a week. So whatever happened to turn him into Sideways, it's only been a week. He's still learning how to do it. His friend Ernie is in on it to some extent. But he's just getting a costume, and he's just really kind of learning what he can do. So, and you also find out that Ernie and her sister, again, you know, they're opposites. They're polar opposites. So that's all introduced like within the first few pages. You also find out that Derek is kind of a typical, somewhat unreliable teenager, you know, as far as being on time. You know, both Ernie and his mother remark about him, you know, being late or maybe not showing up and that sort of thing. So he does have a mother and a father, you know, so it's not just Aunt May or something like that if we're comparing to Spider-Man. He does seem, just based on the few panels that have been introduced here, to have a closer relationship with his mother, but that's hard to definitely justify because, you know, you've only seen a little bit of interaction. Now, the reason they spend more time with his mother in this issue is, and this is where it ties directly into Metal, it mentioned, you know, his father's watching TV and there's some stuff on the news, and it's, hey, they're still talking about what happened in Gotham last month. And so that establishes that Metal was roughly a month ago, because there's that big Challenger's Mountain appeared in Gotham and all that crazy stuff with Dark Knight's Metal happened. Now, you get some driving to work, you get some interplay with him and his mom. She's extremely overprotective now after what happened to him in Gotham, which we'll find out here in a moment. But yeah, you know, she's extremely overprotective. And the Gotham thing and his mother being a massive mother hit on him now is also leading to him being picked on at school. So, you know, being like, that's that weird kid from Gotham, and you know, his mommy, you know, she actually let him out of his sight and that kind of thing. So yes, he gets picked on at school, just like Peter Parker. So, and then she mentions her mom mentions her boss is named Miss Dominus, some kind of scientific corporation. And whoa, if that's not obvious that her mom's boss is going to end up being some sort of villain or antagonist or something like that. I mean, you name somebody Dominus their last name is Dominus in a comic book, and also they have some sort of laboratory or something, you know, some kind of laboratory. Yeah, this is you know, she's going to be some kind of villain or some kind of antagonist or something. And then you get a flashback to where they had been in Gotham, and the whole point of going to Gotham is that, you know, his mother was going to introduce him to Miss Dominus to interview for an internship. And she's like, you know, when you talk to Miss Dominus, what do you say? And he says that her name is really intimidating and kind of a joke. But at that point, portals open up and crazy, because they're in Gotham and it's a flashback, and crazy Dark Knight's Metal stuff happens. Derek and his mom get separated. He falls through some sort of rift or hole or something like that, and says he wakes up. Now let's see. He fell through the mountain, ended up on the other side of town somehow, and then lights out. And then you know, at some point later, he was found and all that. But it hasn't really been revealed at what point or how his powers began manifesting. But it's pretty much been outright said, I think, on the internet, reading some articles or whatever. He's been infused with dark matter energy, which is, you know, there's that dark multiverse that Dark Knight's Metal is all about. So he somehow got suffused or something, or changed by this dark matter, dark universe matter or whatever, and that's what it's giving him his powers, which to this point appear to be, you know, he's kind of tough. He can make these rifts and step through them, and then he seems to be super strong. So that's what we know up to this point. And then he now we do have, of course, here's the shot of the kids picking on him. And then there's that one girl at the bottom there that is like, "Hi, Derek." So, of course, you got the one girl that kind of likes him, right? And we don't know the nature of his and Ernie's relationship. My guess is that they're just platonic friends based on how they interacted, but very, very good friends. But there didn't seem to be any, you know, romance in there, at least not yet. So, towards the end of the issue, he finally does, you know, sneak away, put on his costume, and he's actually not like, I'm going to go out and find supervillains. He, and you know, you can find a free preview of this part online. And a lot of the DC comic books have had previews of the New Age of Heroes stuff in them. So you can actually find this whole sequence here where, you know, he opens up Rifts and he starts broadcasting live on, either he's recording to broadcast it later, or else he's, you know, broadcasting live on like YouTube or something, or Twitch or whatever. It doesn't quite say that I can remember. He just says the online world, hello people online and around the world. And he's got the live stream premiere of Stepping Out with Sideways. And he's showing people his riffs, bouncing around. And then this big booming voice starts talking to him. You can see in these big, huge bubbles, speech bubbles there, saying, you know, like, "Stop. You must stop. Stop now." And so he's like, okay, this is weird. So he starts rifting to try to get away from this voice, and the voice follows him. And then ultimately he ends up, you know, he riffs, you know, sideways, sideways, sideways. The voice talks to him, and it appears by the panels even across rifts. So it's not just a physical location for that voice. Then I love this two-page spread. Somehow he riffs above the skyline and he falls. He manages to catch himself, drops his phone and breaks it. He says, "Mom's going to kill me." And then he says, "I wouldn't." And he hears that voice go, "I would not be concerned." And the next, we end on this, which that is, again, Tempus Fuginaut is the name of this character. And he says, you know, "You've been judged a threat to existence, etc. And, you know, your fate is death." And, you know, he's like, "Wait, what?" Now, obviously, we can assume he doesn't die next issue because, you know, there's already been future issues solicited and there's more characters to be introduced here. That's one of the downsides of knowing stuff, right? Like, used to, you're like, well, I don't know how many issues of this. He could die next issue for all I know. But now, you know, it's like, oh, it's already been solicited 5 issues, and I go on the internet and I find all these characters that are still supposed to come and everything. And it's also a downside when you've been reading comics for decades, you lose that, you know, I mean, because, you know, when your first few years you're reading comics, you haven't seen the same kind of stories told over and over. You don't realize, you don't think in terms that, well, this is a business, and if they kill the character, then they lose money, and da-da-da. So he's like, well, he might die, you know. Which is a testament to how much I love comics, that even knowing all of that stuff, becoming somewhat, I don't know, jaded, or just knowing, you know, it's like when you watch a movie and you're thinking more about what's the director of photography doing there, rather than just enjoying the movie. But it's how much I love comics. I can still read comics and enjoy them, but major digression. So that's kind of a roundup of what happened in the first issue. I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good flow. I'm really impressed with how much the storytellers, and that's, you know, that's how they're doing it now. They're saying Kenneth Rocafort, who's the main artist, Dan DiDio, they're calling them storytellers. Dan DiDio's writing it. Kenneth Rocafort is drawing it. And, you know, as with the all of this New Age of DC Heroes stuff, I don't know if you can see that there or not, but, you know, Rocafort is getting first billing because they're really pushing this new age of heroes as they're really putting the artist front and center. You know, I read a quote from Dan DiDio where he's like, yeah, you know, it's a visual medium. So anyway, and then the dialogue part of the writing is Dan DiDio and Justin Jordan. Daniel Brown is the colorist. Carlos M. Manguel, I guess, is the letterer, et cetera, et cetera. So enjoyed it very much. I love that, even though I noticed the exposition, I loved it. I mean, man, they packed so much into these first few pages to tell you what the heck is going on, without, you know, giving you a Star Wars text crawl that you had to read. You know, they just jumped right in. You know, it definitely gets the award, as I said, for the most dense exposition I've seen in a comic book for a long time. You know, it left me, I want to know what happens next. And that's really, isn't that like a key part of, you know, comic books or any medium, really, any storytelling? I want to know what happens next. Am I reading it just because, well, I bought the first one, so let me see what's happening in the second one? Or do I want to see what happens next? I want to see what happens next. I want to learn more about these characters. I want to learn more about how they fit into the DC world, and all of that. So the riffs make kind of a clever little rift sound. So every time he opens one of these, see how it says RFFT? Every time he opens one, it says rift. So I thought that was a nice little, you know, thing. I love, you know, I love these iconic sound effects from comics, right? Bamf is, you know, Nightcrawler. Snikt is, you know, Wolverine. Thwip, Spider-Man. You know, now maybe rift or whatever will be his signature sound effect. So another thing, when he opens rifts, they're kind of like a V shape. And if you'll notice on his costume, they worked that V shape in there. And I think it's in a couple of other, yeah, it's like they're on his arm and that kind of thing. And you get the sense there's a couple of times where, like, when he's showing off at the very beginning and he's live streaming, he riffs and falls into a lake. You know, he appears above the water, a few feet above the water, and falls into the lake, which seems like, you know, that's, And I don't know why, you know, if he chose to go to that wooded area with the lake. I don't know how it works. And then he, you know, he starts bouncing around. And at one point, as he's rifting, he says, I have to find some place safe, not home. And when he says that, he ends up in Ernie's bedroom again. Like you can tell there in that panel, that's her bedroom. That's her gaming chair and all of her cosplay stuff and a little comic book long box and all that. So, you know, he said somewhere safe. And I don't know if he said, you know, I want to be safe in Ernie's room or just take me somewhere safe. And he ended up in Ernie's room. So, and then he riffs immediately back out. And he says, I just got to keep moving. And then he pops again in this sequence here where he's, whoa, above the skyline. I mean, I doubt he would choose to do that. So he's like, I just got to keep moving. Suddenly he's like, ah. So I don't know how that, you know, how precise can he be? Does he really have to concentrate and then he can be really precise? Or is it just always going to be a little bit off? You know, I don't know. And then finally you have, you know, this last page where he's, you know, messing with Tempus Fuginaut. So anyway, again, I think out of all three that I've read so far, Damage, Silencer, and Sideways, you know, I like this one the best so far. Although I'm going to go with all three of them. I'm going to go with every series of this new age of heroes, at least 2 or 3 issues each one. But, you know, I feel like I'm definitely in on Sideways for at least 1 or 2 arcs. You know, and Damage and the Silencer probably, but again, Sideways is my favorite so far. I liked the art a lot. I liked the story. I liked the character, and you know, I'm a Spider-Man sucker. I love Spider-Man. You know, one of my complaints of the past several years, not just recent Marvel, but the past several years, is I think Spider-Man works best when he's, you know, high school or early college Peter Parker, you know, clumsy, socially awkward, not clumsy physically because he's Spider-Man, but, you know, just socially clumsy, socially awkward, trying to pay the rent, trying to take care of his aunt, having problems, and also trying to be just a good person and a good hero. And that's my favorite type. That's my favorite type of Spider-Man. And that's kind of what they're setting up here, with, you know, Derek James as Sideways. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, I recommend checking it out. I think this is a good example of what DC is trying to do with the new age of heroes. Anyway, other than that, thanks for watching. I'd love to hear your comments or feedback. Are you reading any of these new age of heroes? What do you think of them? What do you think of Sideways, etc.? Do you agree or disagree with, you know, some of my thoughts on it? Anyway, thanks for watching. Love to have a comment and a thumbs up, some sort of feedback that helps me out tremendously, and we will catch you next time on Shameplace.
Time for a disappearing act, boys.